but it also just strikes me. And I was talking about this on Woke Bros with Waz. Actually, we did a really good segment on Kamala Harris last week, which people should definitely listen to. And it's like, and I want you to, like, we're going to get into Kamala Harris pretty in depth now, but it just strikes me that, like, the rhetoric that is so essentialist is not only problematic at times in terms of the issues you identify, but it's also like, it's literally essentialist. So that if you came to the Jewish community and you said, you know, let's like really stereotype it. Like, Jews are people who live in the New York suburbs and they have multiple degrees and they're affluent and they practice finance, law, or medicine, right?
To be clear, these are not things that I said. He said them.
Oh. And I'm not even setting up a joke. That is a inaccurate stereotype. In fact, if you look at the broad expanse of the Jewish community, there's in fact a lot of poverty in the Jewish community. If you globalize it, there's a lot of the broad sort of distribution of economic and social difference that you have in any community. And so, actually, I'll keep pushing the analogy. When Joe Lieberman is the vice presidential nominee, there is something just innate of like, okay, a group that is underrepresented, and it's different. There's no doubt a racial difference, but there's just something like, okay, he's the first Jewish nominee for vice president. That's something. But then what does he represent in this community? And what is the context of the community? And I found this really, because when I anecdotally speak to people that I know in the African-American community, the Afro-Caribbean community that represent the expanse of that of community economically and educationally, and I'm definitely not, it's not anti-Harris or pro-Bernie, but it is absolutely not this like one-dimensional narrative that media try to appeal, because like normal people doing a smart, sophisticated analysis, they're taking multiple variables in and they're saying, on one hand, like any right, I'll be done in a second, like any right-thinking person, if you asked me just generically, hey, would you like to see a black woman beat the shit out of Donald Trump in 2020? Of course. I think you'd have to be demented to not want to see that. I was
just going to say generally not in the context of
I've definitely already made that joke, and much worse. I have pushed the boundaries of how far that joke could be pushed. Yeah, a lot of words like figurative, literal, kill, on and off the field, that type of thing. I know you don't like going that far, so I've not wanted to bring you in it. But that point, but and then on the other hand, a lot of very correct questions about actually, first of all, well, the prosecutor thing raises some eyebrows, and then like, what's her plan on college? What's her plan on, all the things that people have to think about in this way that really undermine that. The narrative, again, it's a problem in terms of broad electoral coalition building, but it's also so essentializing and undermining of real political differences inside fill in the blank community. So anyways, that's my preamble. You wrote a really good piece, A Problem for Kamala Harris. Can a prosecutor become a president in the age of Black Lives Matter? We're going to get to the sound in a few minutes, but I mean, first, kind of, what's your read?
So I think my perspective on her, I have to admit, is informed by the fact that I dated a public defender for the past 3 years. And, all his friends are public defenders.
Right.
His roommate was a public defender. And we hung out with all the public defender crew. And I think that there is an extent to which a lot of people who are outside of the legal community, and particularly outside of that community, don't see prosecutors as an arm of law enforcement and as the power behind everything that they dislike about the police and police corruption and violence against particularly marginalized communities. But when your job is to defend particularly those people who are the most vulnerable, who can't afford their own representation, you come face to face with the extent to which they are actually, in a lot of ways, more culpable than cops, because cops, their job is to follow up with crime and bring whoever is, who did it in, right? Mm-hmm. Try to find out what happened. It's the prosecutor's job to lock them up. Mm-hmm. And the prosecutor has the discretion to not do so if they don't want to. So we live in a world now where slowly but surely, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, people are increasingly aware that the legal system as it exists is not the way it has to be. So we have figures like Larry Krasner who have completely redefined what it means to be a prosecutor, notably someone who spent his entire career as a public defender, who immediately got into office and started acting like public defenders would want prosecutors to act in the interest of broad substantive fairness. Right. So, Kamala Harris has been portraying herself as a progressive prosecutor, which is something that I feel like is in kind of a bizarre choice in a world where we actually do, for the first time, have progressive prosecutors. And so my question is, understanding what her trajectory is, understanding that she claims to have these super lefty bona fides, that her parents met at Berkeley, and she says, no one had to tell me about police injustice or civil rights. I was born knowing because of my parents, right? She grew up in Berkeley. She went to law school and then made a choice, an informed choice, to become a prosecutor. Now, who does that? I'll tell you who does that.
Tell me who does that.
It's a very common career trajectory for people who want to go into politics.
Right.
So you can graduate from law school and go into a big firm, but you get a lot of brownie points if you have worked in a context where you get a lot of trial experience. Because in big law, you get none. I've never in my life, had a case that actually went to trial. I've never been in a,
Wait for it. The super producer a little slow on this drop. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes. So it's not only that; it's a way to shore up your, your political,
resume.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So people say because she is a black woman, because she's black, because she's a woman, she had to be tough on crime. She had to take the kind of job that would, show that she wasn't going to let her community off the hook, as it were. But that's the problem.
Right. Well, that kind of feeds to what I was saying before, which is like some of the defenses become so profoundly racialized and condescending and invalidating of themselves. Like,
and careerist. It's fundamentally careerist. Like they're basically saying is for her to get ahead, she had to do this.
Right.
Right. So you're explicitly acknowledging that the whole point here is so she can have a political career. Mm-hmm. She had to be overly punitive to black and brown people and low income people.
Yep. And again, that to me, and I'll just broaden it to, right, it's careerist. And then if you want, and then you could defend, like, well, maybe the calculation is she puts herself in a position where she can do the greater good, right? Which I don't buy that, but I'm just saying we're going to talk about that right after we play this clip. But I just want to say, like, the fundamental base of this conversation, though, for me is like I'm willing to consider and be educated on these variables. What I am absolutely not willing to do is not take her seriously as a candidate, because the irony of so many of these defenses is actually the profound condescension that one of the most prominent politicians in the United States, someone who I would say on a just kind of performance level is the most formidable candidate in terms of, the kind of like charisma and all of that. I mean, we're not talking about Obama or Clinton, but this isn't an electrifying field in that way. So she is the best of that quotient in this field. Sure. I have my defense of why I do think Bernie is actually charismatic, but that's a different conversation. So I'm saying this is an enormously formidable candidate, and I'm going to take her record enormously seriously because she could be the Democratic nominee and indeed the President of the United States. And we can have a conversation that it takes into account every single other factor, including the obvious distinct burdens that she has as an African-American woman seeking national office, of course. But any escape, because I've seen the arguments you're putting forward as essentially not only is that case closed in terms of why she did, and now therefore any discussion of her record is somehow innately problematic. Mm-hmm. And then we've really just lost it's like now we're in the Bill Fletcher Jr. like only a whale can critique Moby Dick sort of territory of just like the most absurd, postmodern relativistic.
We're Russian bots. Did you see the Joyanne Reed fiasco?
But trust me, I know you did.
I think the Intercept's going to publish something about this, I think, tomorrow. Scoop. But Joanne Reid on her show earlier this week had this woman on who was making the argument that there are a bunch of people who are being very critical of Kamala and Cory Booker, who have the hashtag ADOS in their handle, which stands for American Descendants of Slaves. So a lot of like Black American descendants of slaves refer to themselves as descendants, things like that. And because a bunch of Black Americans are being critical of these two candidates,
obviously
her argument is that it's
naturally.
She says, watch out, if they have ADOS in their handle, it means they're a Russian bot. And what's her name? Angela Rye got on this as well and corroborated it.
I liked Angela Rye, really. I mean, I liked Angela Rye from like 2 CNN clips. It's not a highly informed opinion. That sucks.
Hold my tongue.
No, you can. You actually. Fine. You know what? I have to say, we still have some differences of opinion and a different approach to Twitter, but the last couple of weeks you've bought a lot more space with me in terms of how much you can lay down, because my whole like peacemaking instincts have just been like, really? Are you fucking kidding me?
There's some bizarro world stuff happening. The Bernie giving a speech is racist business.
Yeah.
Like, I thought it was pretty inert to how dumb things could get. That was some next level dumb stuff.
Well, that's actually, I'll just lay this out. I wasn't going to address it, but I look, 2 quick points on that. You could conceivably convince me that if he said, I'm not going to do this because of Stacey Abrams' speech, that might have been a smart, tactical, short-term play. Now, or maybe not. I'm not wedded to that position. But the second thing, I want to go back to this other point. Like, yes, of course, this is distinct, historical, and important. And you know what? I have a huge amount of respect for Stacey Abrams as, first of all, I consider her to be the rightful governor of Georgia. And I think she's an enormously effective frontline American politician. And I think this, like, the subtext of this, like, kindergarten, like, oh, well, I mean, Bernie's going to do his live stream, and then it's all going to be done. To me, and I will say this particularly with white people making that argument, I found that to be the most condescending, patronizing. Like, somehow people need to figure out in these circles, and I'm talking very specifically about liberal white people, how to acknowledge, understand, own all the adjectives, racism and sexism and so on, and also still have like an adult metric for interacting with national leaders.
Yeah.
And
I will say
that
it's not just woke white people who were on that bandwagon.
No doubt. But I was amazed. I was literally embarrassed to read tweets like that on behalf of everybody, including most probably fucking Stacey Abrams.
Yeah. Yeah, especially the when it came out like halfway through the day that Kamala Harris was also going to give a speech. Hers was before, so literally the word upstaging was being used. The way you upstage someone is to precede them. Bernie Sanders' speech didn't overlap with Abrams. It followed. He's given it like now 3 years in a row. All of the things that we know to be true, and the fact that people were presented with the evidence that Kamala Harris was doing the same thing but worse, and excused her. Literally, people were writing, well, she did hers first, so that makes it better. But why?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
I don't think so.
There it is.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, it was like gaslighting. It was a rough day on Twitter.
Yeah, I tapped out of that one. But I mean, and also, I think, Matt, you maybe, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you made this point, at least to me, and I'll absorb it if you don't want to, take it on too. But like, this is all literally happening on the same day that people are essentially marking Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib for some of the most racialized, attacks on their Israel position, implying they're anti-Semitic, free of any evidence. I mean, this is like, you literally at the same moment that all of this nonsense about these speeches is going on, you have an example of two of the most important freshman congresswomen who everybody at least pays lip service to supporting are being harassed in media and by fellow members of Congress while we're doing, Bernie's doing a live stream, obviously, that
On Facebook.
He's on Facebook. And it's finally real, his real, like, he's going to come out and just be like, oh, everybody gets health care and we need a Polish homeland of white people, or whatever other. I mean, it was just, if you bring in Ilan and Rashida Tlaib into that, it really just completes a picture of like,
yeah, it's a lot of pretextual nonsense, which is the kind of thing that set off the James Damores of the world.
Right. That's right.
He's very wrong, but there is like a weird culture that does exist on the fringes that does not help the case, that does not help the left case.
No, definitely. And it's, and people need to be able to, absorb and evolve from those things. So this is another thing that didn't help. This video has gone around a lot, but it needs to. And I don't, and again, I think I am very much in a position where I can really attest. There's plenty of clips of plenty of politicians, even ones whom I oppose, who I'm very willing to be like, you know what, whatever. That was the context. That was the time. I'm probably more willing to do that about Kamala Harris than many other people in my political profile, just to be blunt. That being said, and even just coming from an experience of poverty personally, we know over-sentencing. We know attacking sex workers. We know all these huge problems in her record, which I hope you'll elaborate on. There is something profoundly pernicious about looking at a problem like child truancy and thinking that it is a criminal problem and not one of justice and compassion, let alone sort of laughing off criticisms of it. So we will play this clip again.
I would not be standing here were it not for the education I received. And I know many of us will say the same thing. And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. Oh. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done. This is a serious issue, and I've got a little political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it. And this is what we did. We recognized that in that initiative, as a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick. The school district has got a carrot. Let's work in tandem around our collective objective and goal, which is to get those kids in school. So, to that end, on my letterhead, now let me tell you something about my letterhead. When you're the DA of a major city in this country, usually the job comes with a badge. This is creepy. And there is often an artistic rendering of said badge on your stationery. So I sent a letter out on my letterhead to every parent in the school district, outlining the connection that was statistically proven between elementary school truancy, high school dropouts, who will become a victim of crime, and who will become a perpetrator of crime. We sent it out to everyone. A friend of mine actually called me and he said, Kamala, my wife got the letter. She freaked out. She brought all the kids into the living room, held up the letter, said, if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail. Yes, we achieved intended effect.
And she also, to be clear, I just, Bri, please take over, but I just want to be clear. And this is one of the, I literally got some pendant responses, like, well, what if it helped the attendance rate? Which is if that's your response, you are wrong. You're in the wrong moral universe. She also did actually prosecute people. She did. So there wasn't just emotional terrorism. There was actual prosecution. But please, Bri.
So my former colleague at The Intercept, Zed Jelani, wrote a piece that argued that it worked. And then my colleague at Current Affairs, Nathan Robinson, wrote a response to that piece that I thought was pretty excellent. That basically drew the comparison to Singapore and said that there are posters on the street that say, if you spit your gum out, you're going to get caned.
And they do that in Singapore, and it works.
It's clean.
It's a very clean place by all accounts.
Clean, well-run authoritarian state.
That's right.
So I think that's the point there. I mean, the problem is Nathan also wrote in a different article about Kamala Harris that, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And when all you have is the ability to prosecute, you start to look at every problem and think that you can prosecute your way out of it. And it's just really disturbing to look at something like truancy, to profess to have concern for the fact that truant kids will end up in the criminal justice system, the one you have exert power over and authority over, and then decide that your ability to your way to contribute is not going to be to step out of your professional role and think about what you can do, to support legislative initiatives, to bring attention to various causes, to contribute financially, et cetera, but to simply prosecute their parents and brag about your authority as a cop and your badge on the letterhead.
It's so creepy. That's really the only
You
word.
have to threaten people into
monstrous.
compliance. To see a family whose kids are struggling to get to school on time, and to think that the reason why their parents aren't forcing them to has to do with their parents' negligence, and not the fact that low-income parents are often working multiple jobs, aren't able to be there when their kids are going off to school. The kids are going to schools that no sane person would want to step foot in because they're so poorly run and dangerous. To not think of that whole cluster of humanitarian concerns that are driving these impulses, and to assume that it's something about just individual will and something that you can wrest people into, is such a cruel and base perception of humanity, and shows such a flat understanding of the social factors that go into an outcome like truancy. That bothers me on many, many levels. It gives me concerns about who she is as a leader, much more broadly than just this narrow issue, which in and of itself is very, very bad.
No, that's a microcosm. That is an issue where you can absolutely arguably say this is a window into a profoundly disturbed moral compass. And I want to say, with criminal justice issues and all that comes with them in terms of race, in terms of economics, in terms of also just our broader, I'll get to that to a second, but I think actual really important values like restoration and compassion. All of the candidates, let's just stipulate, all of these candidates have cast bad votes, including Bernie Sanders. Most of them have engaged in, tough on crime discourse. Cory Booker did some very aggressive police maneuvering in Newark. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to me, stand out significantly in this category. He wrote the 94 crime bill, which is one of the most massive expansions of the criminal industrial complex in U.S. history, and she prosecuted the fuck out of it. If you take these issues seriously, I don't know how you come back from those two.
It's hard, and I want to be really clear. I am someone who does believe in redemption and rehabilitation, and would create some space for her to reckon substantively with her record.
Yep. And
to talk. If she was out here saying, look, I look back at the decisions I made and I cringe at watching that video.
Right.
I thought I had to make compromises that I realize now I didn't have to, and were wrong and weren't worth the outcome. And I am committed to making amends in every way I can if I were to be elected. She might be our candidate, and we might all have to get behind her.
Yep.
And I would have a lot easier time voting for her if she reckoned with this in a serious way, just like if Hillary Clinton had reckoned with some of her past, instead of pretending like everything was, sexism, some of which it was, but not everything.
Of course.
It would have been a lot easier to put a lever for her. But, she hasn't. She hasn't, more than she hasn't. There are multiple clips of this nature where she keeps repeating the argument. She says even right there, my staff thought this was controversial. My staff didn't want me to do this. She knows. So people have told her what the implications of this are, and she persists in doing so anyway.
Although I have a skepticism about one part of that clip, because she frames it as the staff is concerned electorally.
Not ethically. That's interesting.
Bullshit. I don't buy that for a second. Even in San Francisco, and I know that, look, let's be real. San Francisco already at that point had been well gentrified. For most of modern American history, a DA could always bet on running a far right. And in fact, Kamala Harris ran against a real progressive in one of her DA races and attacked them from the authoritarian right on crime. The concern was people who actually worked in that office, if I'm projecting, was of people who actually had some ethical qualms about terrorizing poor families.
Yeah.
Not this isn't going to poll well in the Mission District.
Yeah.
That is fucking bullshit.
So Li Fong published an article today
Yeah.
at around 1 o'clock. I think you should try to pull up the pictures from it if you can, because he went to San Francisco and spent the whole day walking around the city until he found some campaign flyers from that race against Terrence Hallian, I think was his name, the progressive prosecutor that she beat. So Terrence, I know his first name is Terrence. I'm ambivalent about his pronunciation of his last name. Yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
So he had lowered prosecution rates dramatically. He was funneling all of these kids not into prison but into rehabilitation drug programs and community service and all this. He was doing exactly what he should have done decades before this new wave of progressive prosecutors. She beat him using flyers like this with, coded Latino at the very least, chest with tattoos across it.
That literally could be a Trump ad. I'm not using hyperbole.
Yes.
Here. That could be a Trump ad.
Yes. If you scroll down to the next one, there's one with a chalk outline. Okay. And if you go to...
let me read it for people listening.
Sorry.
This one is a chalk outline of a dead body, and it says, an outline for disaster. Which district attorney has ranked last in convictions every year for the last 8 years? The last one is essentially, it's supposed to be, it's some type of photo of it looks like an album cover to me, but it's coded for Latinos, throwing a gang sign, holding a gun. Enough is enough. Murder is up 30%. Skyrocketing rates of youth in jails. Another generation lost to gang violence. Who hears the cry for help? A new voice for justice. Now, the language on that one is actually not so problematic, but the visual is almost Horton-esque.
So if you click through, I think on the second one, you can see the inside of it. So click underneath the full mailer. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this, it's like the chart of the conviction rates going down, which in a different world you think is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But it just shows you, how intense she was about using this guy's good, admirable record as a selling point for her. In Lee's article, it's very good and gets into a lot of the details of the politics and the things that she says. One point she says, well, to be clear, I'm no public defender. I mean, she really, really goes hard in the paint. And there's some, just read it. I was spellbound.
A lot of hand checks. She was the Patrick Ewing of DAs.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't want to have to go in so hard on her. Like I was very ambivalent about it. When she, she's been the projected, best, number one kind of centrist candidate option since the second Trump was elected. And, I don't have any interest in attacking her particularly, but it's like you scratch the surface and it's just more and more and more of this stuff comes up. And it's getting to a point where I'm seeing, I'm used to being kind of like the lefty black person, right? I'm seeing in broad mainstream black Twitter, people are very unhappy with both her and Cory Booker in a way that I find frankly heartening. People are saying things, tweeting, writing in comment sections, things like, we're not falling for this okadoke. Right. I'm not going to be put in this position where you're going to force me to vote for someone like this just because they're black. You have to do better.
Absolutely. And I also just want to say, I think more broadly, and this kind of somewhat correlates with the Damore conversation earlier. I find it in a culture generally, particularly on the left and in these sort of small social circles, where there needs to actually be way more of an emphasis on complexity, restoration, compassion, broader analysis. There is something that's really disturbing about almost like a person, there's almost like a perfect synergy of a certain very narrow type of representation with a record that reflects this profoundly punitive, cruel, and discarding of humanity impulse, which we need to be fighting against on all fronts. And I actually love that you added, including for her, because if she was out robustly pivoting her policy, I would be centering that. I'm not saying I would support her. I mean, it's pretty clear that I'm going to support Bernie Sanders because of my politics, but I would have no commitment to relitigating this at all in the same way.
Yep.
And I've actually tried to bend over backwards, even for people that, frankly, if you put a gun to my head, do I really trust that Cory Booker is some great porn-again progressive or Kirsten Gillibrand? No, I don't. But I've given them a lot of space. I think that Tulsi Gabbard's connections to the Hindu far right are profoundly disturbing. But you know what? She said some great stuff on Venezuela. She's been talking about the earth and peace. And so I'm not that I'm going to stop criticizing her, but like, let's be more, not us personally, but in the sense, Christ-like, like literally, like more space, more forgiveness, more compassion, more reconciliation. But she is not, I mean, in the CNN town hall, she basically was like, look, if you don't like prosecutors, don't vote for me.
Yeah. I liked to think that line was about me. I like to think that she read my article because she says, some people just think that all prosecutors are bad. I'm not going to please them.
Yeah, but the problem with that, I mean, it could have been about you, but the problem is we like Larry Krasner.
Right. Well, I'd say that I'd make the distinction
No, I know,
in the
of course
article.
you do. But even that, I won't let her have that frame.
Yeah.
Because I got doubly pissed. Because, like, first of all, you're totally negating the substance of this question. And secondly, people are working across the country to elect, yeah. I mean, there's a slew of people getting elected to that position who want to, like, actually generate actual justice and well-being. So you're not only disingenuously brushing off your record, you're undermining many candidates, including, by the way, if we want to, many women of color candidates, in fact. So that really is, that's the full circle of the problem. Of course, it would be valid to talk about if she had changed. Yeah. But she hasn't.
Yeah. And to the point about prosecutors that I mentioned earlier, I do want to say that when I was in law school, one of the most impactful kind of seminars that I went to was this progressive prosecutor panel, and it was put on by the Black Student Association. And at this panel, they had two prosecutors. One who was a younger guy, currently a prosecutor, and an older guy who had been a prosecutor and then quit. The young guy went first and gave the pro prosecutor pitch. I'm going to work from the inside. You need good people there. If I'm not there as a Black man to hold people accountable, then who else is going to do it? I heard him talk, and 22-year-old me said, "Oh, fantastic. Obviously, you have to work from the inside. Anybody who doesn't believe that is incredibly cynical and blah, blah, blah." Then the second guy spoke. And holy shit, if he didn't change my mind. He told this story, and I cite him in my piece. I wanted to talk to him, but I wasn't able to get him in time. He told a story about how he was standing in court, having brought a case against a Black man who was from the same neighborhood as he was, similar age, could have been him in a different world. And how there was this, the subtext, I think, of his co-counsel was that he was being pointed to as the example of how you can make it. And that this guy's race, I think it was during sentencing, how this guy's race and class background and all those kinds of things wasn't an excuse for what he had done. And in that moment, he realized, and this is 10 years since I heard this story, and I don't want to misrepresent him at all, but my recollection of it is that he said, I realized in that moment how much my very presence is used to pretend that the system is fundamentally fair and sound. Yep. And there is that way, I had a class with Lonnie Guinier, and she made this argument right after Barack Obama was elected. I was a 1L in law school, and I remember thinking, oh, that's so cynical that, I shouldn't be happy about Barack Obama because he's just making everybody think that race is okay, that the system is okay. Right. But over time, it became increasingly clear to me, my perspective is very much that when you have a system that is so fundamentally unjust, where people's literal lives are at stake, we can't sit here playing games I'm going to do a little bit. And I don't mean to say that everyone's a prosecutor. One of my best friend's husband's a prosecutor. It's a little dicey right now. Yes. I'm not saying that everyone has the moral weight of everything that's wrong in the criminal justice system on their shoulders, but particularly when you're in there for a career and you know that you're so junior that you're not going to be able to exert any influence. You don't have prosecutorial discretion. Right. You are literally the arm of the system that you know is fundamentally unjust. That's what you're signing up for. And I don't think that we should wave away the ethical implications of doing so. There's ethical implications of being at the bottom where you can't really help very much. And if you're at the top and you're not doing what you're supposed to do, if you're not being Larry Krasner, then there are overwhelming ethical implications for you as well. And that's the slot that Kamala Harris is in.
Yeah, I don't. And then I have to say, and this is where, again, I would talk about this regardless because it is important. But when you couple opting not to prosecute Steve Mnuchin with we're going to arrest people for truancy, yep, you are never going to convince me.
Yep. And her responses on that have been really inadequate as well.
Right.
You know, the attitude that she feels like she doesn't have to engage. It was such a thoughtful question she got at the CNN town hall.
Very respectful, very thoughtful.
And that she completely sidestepped it. You know, it was like it was disrespectful to all of us who have an ethical concern that at very least I would hope that she shared. Even if she was a craven careerist, if I just knew that at bottom, this is how I feel about Cory Booker. Cory Booker is a trip and a half. But I
and
think
a cornball.
A cornball. Sure, but I and maybe I'm wrong and naive, but my sense of him is that if he were born in 1985 instead of 1972 or whatever, if he was coming up in the Ocasio-Cortez generation and today when being a progressive
Oh, are you kidding me?
Is actually the politically expedient thing to do.
He would be in Caracas having a hunger strike right now.
He would love it. He would be happy to be able to be the good guy.
Right.
Like he wants to be the good guy so desperately.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
And he thought he had to make whatever compromises, take the pharma money, whatever. It's not good. It's not an excuse. But I believe in his heart, he wants to be the good guy. When I hear Kamala Harris like snickering like she just did, I don't know what to make of that.
Right. No, it's profoundly disturbing. And again, it's like, you know, the last thing I'll put in this is like when you read The Audacity of Hope, you know, Barack Obama, you know, he put some gestures towards restorative justice, but he makes very clear that he supports the death penalty. I mean, it's totally like, and in very Obama, like, I think that if you hurt a child, we ought to be able to mete out the ultimate justice.
It's always the child.
Always
Kamala
the child.
Does that. Let's talk about child predators and murderers.
Always the worst, most, right. Exactly.
80% of people in jail in California are there for like
shoplifting on a third
it's
strike.
It's like people are in there for misdemeanors. It's like truancy.
Truancy, marijuana, shoplifting, and also, frankly, other things that are more serious that we still need to restore people from. But but that being said, I just like Barack Obama. If you write and you signify that as like, I'm going to go for being not only, you know, the first African American president and somebody who's clearly very kind of, you know, ethereal and worldly, like, you can give me all the political cases all day and it could still be wrong, but I can hear it is distinct from you literally prosecuted people. I mean, that's just where I'm stuck. Yeah. Because if you come at me politically, I have a lot of time for machinations and maneuvers, but I don't have a lot of time for, you know, arguing to uphold a conviction that the judge tells you should throw out. I don't have a lot of time for, you know, arguing against repealing the death penalty. I don't have a lot of time for defending the 3 strikes laws, which is a national disgrace, which was implemented by Governor Wilson, who's a prototype for Trump. In some respects, some of the things we're seeing in the United States today writ large were previewed in California in the mid-90s. Yeah. I can't do it.
It's not going to go away. And for her own best interest, you know, I have another piece. I'm going to sound like I'm just hitting her all the time in these pieces. I wrote this piece in like November and it just didn't get published. It's coming out now after some revisions. But when I write, I want it to be a call to do better.
Right.
It's not because I want to condemn her. I'm not saying I'm going to vote for her, but I want her to be the best version of a candidate she can be because we might end up with her.
Absolutely.
You know?
No doubt.
And as a human being, I just want her to be her best self. And I don't think it's helping her case politically, strategically, to not engage with these incredibly substantive issues, especially when one of your biggest assets is your so-called appeal to the Black community. This ain't it.
Right. Right. You just enjoyed that Michael Brooks Show video, and you can get a lot more by subscribing to us here at the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. It's literally right there.